Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. All right. So, welcome to Activism as Art. My name is Annie Flom, and I'm going to be moderating this session. Before we start, I'm going to give a brief overview on how to use Crowdcast for those of you who have never used it before. It's pretty similar to Zoom, but it's kind of a sleek interface. So just going to go over a couple of the features so that everyone knows how to use it. So if you would like to submit a question to Keiko at the end of her presentation, you can just click the Ask a Question button at the bottom of the screen. You can ask a question, whenever you want during her presentation if it comes up, and we'll just, go through those at the end of the presentation. So if something comes up for you, feel free to just, enter it in the Ask a Question section. You can also vote on questions that were already posted by other attendees, so that can help determine which questions that we can prioritize. There's also a chat box on the right side of the screen where you can have side conversations, so we'll post any supplemental links or information there. And in order to keep things moving, we're not going to respond to any activity in the chat box. That's just for you, the attendees, to use. But if you would like to ask a question, please put it in the Ask a Question section so that I can be aware of what we are going to address in the Q&A section. All right, so got that housekeeping out of the way. So now I'm going to introduce our speaker, Keiko. Keiko Sono founded Forge Collective to design a system that aligns with the intrinsic values and motivations of people. She is the host and producer of Intrinsic Podcast. She directed Catskill Waters, a public outreach program funded by the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. She is a recipient of the Pollock Krasner Fellowship and Arts Mid-Hudson Individual Artist Grant. She served as visiting artist at SUNY Ulster Community College and at the University of Pittsburgh at Bradford. She has conducted workshops in various institutions, including the SUSI program at Bard Center for Civic Engagement, funded by the U.S. State Department, and the Art Practice MFA program at the School of Visual Art. So you're in great hands today with Keiko. So I'm going to go ahead and bring her up. There she is. All right, take it away, Keiko.
Thank you, Annie. Well, I'm hearing an echo. Sorry. I guess I'm gonna use the headphone. Okay, much better. Sorry about that. All right, so my name is Keiko Sono. Like Annie, sorry. I think I'm hearing an echo again. Can you cut your mic out? Or
Yeah, it's cut out, but let me do that one more time.
Okay, great. Okay, so like I said, my name is Keiko Sono. I've been practicing social practice for the last 10 years. Are you guys hearing echo still? Okay, good. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so you're in a session called Activism as Art. So this is not just for artists or creators. This is for anyone with a passion. So if you're asking yourself, is this for me? Consider this quote from artist Tom Sachs. The reward for good work is more work. Is this you? Are you doing something that you love so much that if you get any reward for it, like money, you'd put right back into your work? If your answer is yes, you're in the right place. And all artists, of course, can attest to this. And this is why I support universal basic income because UBI would allow us to keep doing things that we're passionate about. So what is art, though? Art is such a broad term, and it's really, up to interpretation. For my personal goal, art is a state of mind where you leave the confinement of yourself and feel connected to the larger universe, nature, a group of people, or society, or whatever. And you are immersed with this feeling of gratitude. That is the state of art. So anything that triggers that is artistic practice. So let's look at different types of art, especially related to social movements and activities. So who can forget this iconic image of Barack Obama from his 2008 campaign? Here's the artist, Shepard Fairey, in front of this group of posters. So this iconic image paired with his slogan, no one can deny that they had a huge impact on his campaign. And of course, there are tons of murals. I'm so happy that in the recent years, murals have become really, really popular. It's such a really great way to disseminate information and unite people in the community. But art doesn't have to be just representation. So here it is, arguably, this is one of the early conceptual public art. This is put up by Fay Lewis, who was a big fan of Henry George. He was a supporter of Georgist theory of land value tax. So this guy actually bought this lot of land and put up this billboard. So the knowledge that this guy actually owns this lot goes more than just a billboard itself or information or sign. It makes people really think, oh my gosh, this guy's really going to benefit from this land. So that's what art is. It's not just confined to communication or dissemination of information. And here's a modern version of such art. It's called nudging. It's becoming really popular with the environmental movement and with behavioral economy. So it started out with these green footsteps that led to garbage receptacle and for recycling receptacle. And the studies showed that it actually increased the likelihood of people recycling this way. And here you see a variety of nudging in really fun and playful ways. This one in the lower right corner, it's kind of gross, but you're supposed to put your gum on the crosshair in this map to reveal this shape of telephone box. So it's a little gross, but it worked. So now let's take a look at some projects that were led by ordinary people like you and me. I found this in Kickstarter. So this was started by a group of people who saw that their neighborhood didn't have a laundromat. So they took it further and said, well, laundromat is a place where people spend a lot of time. So why don't we make it into a community space? So they created this really playful and friendly space where they have music performances, poetry reading, and art exhibits. And they successfully raised more than 20,000 pounds and got this wonderful project off the ground. But projects don't have to be started with a group of artists. It can be done just with one person, as in this case of Ian Nesbitt, who set out for a pilgrimage of 220 miles throughout England. And along the way, he talked to people and asked questions of what their visions for a positive future are. And he recorded the conversation, and I think he did a podcast, and he would also send postcards to his supporters from all these different places. And it was a wonderful, fluid and poetic project without really concrete goal or evaluation. The process was the important thing. So these kind of projects can be really small and done individually, or it can be conducted by a group of people. And at this point, allow me to share some of my projects. So I started out as a painter, but in 2004, I had an epiphany. I actually, was just stunned by the second victory of George W. Bush. And I was pregnant with my second kid. So I said to myself, I cannot be just painting in my studio. I have to get out and I have to do something. So I started organizing small projects, always with the aim of bringing people from different, disparate social circles together for deep communication. And with each project, I also aimed to give opportunities or funding to artists to be involved. But these small projects, I had really no funding myself. So a lot of times I paid out of my pockets and, I did it all for free. In 2015, I got my first grant with a proposal to follow this, what seemed like a transformation of a pond in my neighborhood. I thought that it seemed like it was transforming from a pond to bog. So I proposed to follow this progression with crowdsourced images. I put up this platform with an instructional plaque that asked people to take a photo from the same photo and email it to me or give it a hashtag so I could harvest them to create a long-term time-lapse video. I did my homework and I contacted all the landlords or the landowners around the pond and asked for their permission. I didn't get any kind of opposition. I got a lot of support. So I went ahead and put up this platform with this grant. But within several hours, it was turned upside down with a note that said, "Remove this eyesore. This is a private property." And this guy left his address. So I went and knocked on his door, and it turned out that the rights to this spot belong to not only the landowners around the pond, but also the residents along a road that ran parallel to this pond. And he said that he had no problem with the project itself, but he didn't want this platform to attract people. He didn't want it to look like a public land. So I wasn't going to fight that, but without this platform, this project was not going to happen. So I ended up making a whole different project out of it. I made a documentary about what happened that included the history of this pond as well as the ecology of the pond. So I interviewed a whole bunch of people around the pond and a biologist who did the assessment of this pond. So the documentary was like a mosaic of a lot of different aspects of this pond. I invited the residents for a gathering, and which turned out to be a real hit. that was the first time most of these residents met each other, and they've held a block party at the same spot ever since. I was invited to a meeting at a sportsman's club, who is also the owner of this pond, and I was able to present about this project. And the central theme aspect of this documentary was my conversation with the very person who flipped my platform. And I asked him to, have this conversation in front of the camera with me. And I said to him, well, can you please walk me through what was going through your mind when you saw that platform? And he said, yeah, I was driving around and I saw that. And I said, what the fuck? So the conversation started out that way. But in the course of like an hour, I found out that he was a caretaker of this pond, cleaning out the ditch when it got flooded, and he would make sure that the beaver dam was neither too high nor too low. So no wonder he was upset when he saw that platform. So he and I became really good friends, and we really like each other now. So this story got written up in a local newspaper, which attracted attention of local stream programs that led to my next project, which, and as Annie mentioned, was funded by grants from New York City Department of Environmental Protection, who oversees the quality of water that goes into New York City. So most of their water comes from the Catskills, 100 miles north of the city. And because they don't have any filtering system, they make sure that the water quality is maintained at the source. So these local stream programs, they have to deal with landowners, which can be tricky. So they have budget for public outreach. So I received $50,000 grants that I stretched over 3 years, and I hired 3 artists to do 3 projects. One is Jenny Lee Fowler, who is an exquisite profile paper cut portrait maker. So we did several events where we asked participants to come and join us and have their portraits cut and then being interviewed by me. And their stories went into a story archive of oral history in the watershed. Here I'm interviewing a family. And the second project had to do with the stream ecology. I did a documentation of the stream assessment, and I matched a local illustrator whose dream was always to publish a children's book, but he couldn't do that because he had neither time nor money to dedicate to production of children's book. So I gave him a budget, and he made a children's book based on the actual stream that runs through Woodstock. And we hosted a few receptions, and it was wonderful. The third project was the most challenging. I wanted to bring the most cutting edge contemporary artwork into this, the heart of Catskills, which is pretty conservative. So we chose this spot, which is a convenience store in the heart of the Catskill Mountains, who also sells guns. And the time was, Trump had become the president, and he had MAGA hats all over the place. But surprisingly, he agreed to this. And here the artist and the owner are talking about his idea. And it just created this wonderful collaboration. And I documented the process and published it on a podcast. Here's the end result. His artwork installed next to his gun store. But to tell you the truth, it this project kind of took a wrong turn, and I didn't get the result I wanted, and I even like abandoned my podcast because it got kind of too contentious. But I recently received another grant to finish this podcast, so I'll be working on that in the next couple of months. This is the project that I'm working on right now. I've hired a local high school artist to make an animation about UBI in a big picture to show how UBI is an indispensable step towards our new social contract. I'm presenting this at the upcoming Basic Income Earth Network Congress in August. So I hope you'll be able to join me on that as well. So why see activism as art? There are so many benefits. So first, there are psychological benefits. When you see your project as an art project, it simplifies the priorities because you're being driven by this innate goal to create this artwork that moves you. You're not really doing it for money. You're not doing it for fame. You're being driven by your inner voice. And it encourages experience and mistakes because that's what art is about. If you don't make mistakes, you don't learn. And it allows for flexibility and open ending, like the project that was done by Ian Nesbitt. You don't have to prove yourself. It's not really about success. It's not about, reaching some target. It's really about the process. And it also brings a lot of social benefits. When you frame your project as an artwork, it's so much easier for people to be open to your project as opposed to like political campaign. Like if you say anything political, most people just kind of freeze up and say, oh, I'm not going there. But people love art and artwork, especially if it's community oriented. And so it's really easy to approach like local organizations, and it's so easy to make connections through this framework. You can approach local governments, local nonprofits, and local businesses. So, you can build a network that would be long lasting. And lastly, there are financial benefits. There are a lot of tax incentives, and it'll open up access to more funding. And it also opens up possibility for physical sponsorship. So in this next segment, I'll talk more about the financial benefits. So what does it mean to declare yourself as a self-employed artist? So you can do this either as a sole proprietor or an LLC, or you can incorporate as a C or S corporations. So here I'm going to focus on self-proprietorship and LLC, which are very, very easy, especially self-proprietorship. All you have to do is to file Schedule C on your tax return. That's it. You don't even have to file yourself as a business, through DBA or anything like that. And just by filing a Schedule C, you get to deduct so many things as expenses. Okay, first of all, this is not a tax advice. I suggested you talk to your accountant. And your goal is to make a profit. So, like I said, this is not a tax advice. I'm just sharing my experience. But this situation would be really great if you already have a job to survive and you pay tax on, or if you're married and you're filing jointly and your spouse also has a job. for which he or she pays tax. Because if you incur losses through your art practice, you can deduct that loss from your other income, reducing your overall taxable income, which can be quite a lot. Because you can deduct a lot of things. You can deduct supplies, materials, you use computers, you use cameras, you can deduct all of these. If you subscribe to Netflix, that can be deducted as media research. You can deduct books, magazine subscription. If you go to museums, you can deduct, the fee from that under R&D, So this can add up to be quite a lot. But like I said, that's not the reason you do this. The reason you do it is because you want to make money as a self-employed artist. But I'm just saying, if you happen to incur loss, you can deduct it. But you have to be careful, because if you did claim a loss for 3 years straight, that's an automatically red flag, and that could lead you to an audit. However, the recent court cases show that IRS shows some kind of forgiveness for artists, because they seem to understand that it is very hard to make money as an artist. I'm not going to go into details here, but you have to prove that you have all the intention and the tools and everything to make profits from your art practice. You do have to prove that. But compared to other fields, recently IRS has shown some more room for forgiveness. But like I said, this is not a tax advice. And of all the business expenses, home office deduction is really a wonderful area. Again, this is tricky because this could trigger audit if you don't do it right. But the way it works is that you calculate the percentage of an area that you use in your home for your business. And I've done this just, like for 50 square feet before, where I have my desk. And you apply that percentage to any other expenses that are related to home, to your business. I mean, to home, like utility, garbage collection, home repair, all of that. So this can add up quite a lot. Now, what are the funding possibilities as a social practice artist? So there's crowdfunding, like Kickstarter. This is a lot of work. You have to put a lot of work into it. You have to make a video. You have to come up with good incentives. You have to do a hell of a lot of promotion on social media. But when it's done right, you can make a lot of money. And you can raise awareness at the same time. So this is a really wonderful way to raise money for your projects. And there are grants. And so these are really competitive, and it involves a lot of work, like, grant writing. And grants that are offered through open calls, they're really, really competitive. So they might not be worth your time. But a lot of organizations have money for like community related projects, like, the one that I received from New York City DEP. So it's worthwhile to approach your local organizations and agencies to see if they have any budget allocated for community outreach. And once you get a grant, and once you get a kind of learn how to do grants writing, you one grant will lead to another. So this is, I actually like writing grants. So Something to think about. And then there are donations. You'd be surprised how many businesses would give you in-kind donations. I've gotten so much food from local vendors for our receptions and things like that. And a lot of times they don't even like ask you any questions. You just ask them and they give you. And it's a great way to build connections locally. So all these three things can be done as an individual or LLC, but it would be made even easier if you have a fiscal sponsor. What does that mean? Okay, so fiscal sponsorship is an agreement between you or group of artists, or you can be an organization, and an existing 501c3 nonprofit corporation, where you borrow their status and you put all your monetary transactions through their accounts, so that you would have an access to foundation grants that are only open to nonprofit corporations, and receive tax deductible donations. And fiscal sponsorships also gives you a status, like an official status that works for your project. And it's just a really great way to learn how nonprofit operation works without having to incorporate. If you're going to incorporate as a 501c3 corporation yourself, it takes a lot of time, care, and money. So even if that's your end goal, you can first get fiscal sponsor and learn how this whole thing works and receive donations while you work on incorporating. So it's a really good step towards incorporating as a nonprofit. And you can also just function with fiscal sponsorship forever. You don't have to incorporate. It allows for wonderful flexibility, much more flexibility that an actual nonprofit has. You can have a for-profit operation through your LLC or sole proprietorship, and you can sell your merchandise or artwork or whatever, and you can have a nonprofit arm through your fiscal sponsor, and you can just hop between them with like real ease. Another amazing benefit is that because all of your money goes through, all of your nonprofit money goes through your fiscal sponsor's account, the money that you raise stays in their account until you pay yourself, right? So, for example, if you're just a sole proprietor and got like a $10,000 lump sum donation, let's say in November, you don't have time to spend all that money before the end of the year. So you have to pay tax on all of that for that year. But if that money goes to the account of fiscal sponsor, nobody pays tax because they're nonprofit, and you don't have to pay tax until you pay yourself. So this is a really great way to control the timing of the payments. And a lot of fiscal sponsors do this as their thing, as a service, in which case they also offer a lot of consultation, and which is really a wonderful thing. My fiscal sponsor is Fractured Atlas, and this is all they do. That's their service. So they have wonderful staff that will walk you through all kinds of excuse me, processes, and I've learned so much from them. I do pay a monthly membership of $10, but it's really well worth it. And also, fiscal sponsorships give you much more flexibility for your political activities. If you're a 501c3 nonprofit yourself, you're really restricted in terms of your activities that would be considered political campaigns. But all you have to do is just you have to fill out an affidavit with your fiscal sponsor, and you're allowed to engage in any kind of political activities, including campaigning for a candidate, which is not allowed for 501c3 organizations. Of course, you can't use a tax deductible, nonprofit revenue for your political activities, but you are free to engage in such activities. So that's another thing to think about. Now, here are the resources. Like I said, Fractured Atlas is a wonderful organization, but they only fund artists and artists groups. But, social practice art that can include a lot of things. So that's another really nice, a good reason to think of yourself as a community artist. You don't have to be a painter or musician or a sculptor. All you need is a creative mind. Now, National Network of Fiscal Sponsors is a great resource of information. Fiscalsponsordirectly.org has an extensive list of organizations that offer fiscal sponsorship services. New York Foundation for Arts is for New York State only, but it's a wonderful resource for artists in general. They offer fiscal sponsorship service as well as they give out grants. So if you're not in the state of New York, do make sure you check your local and state arts council, many of which offer grants and all kinds of information. And lastly, check out my podcast, Intrinsic, because I dedicated a full episode to fiscal sponsorship. So it's about an hour long, and it's full of information. Okay, so we're going to go into Q&A after this, but if we run out, I'll be hanging out in Kumo space here and there between other presentations, so come and check that out and you can talk to me there. This is the list of my websites, so you can read more about my other projects, as well as Intrinsic Podcast, which is available on most podcast platforms, including Apple and Spotify. And you can contact me through email, forgeartcollective@gmail.com. I am thinking about maybe giving a virtual workshop on this, how to run your own business and work with fiscal sponsorship. So do drop me a line if you're interested in this. Okay, thank you. Thank you for listening, and I will stop sharing so we can start taking questions. Okay.
All right, thanks so much, Keiko. That was amazing. I really loved how you went into how these activist art projects can be this kind of conduit for the community to get to know each other. Totally. It's kind of like a nice excuse to be able to start having some more political conversations without being too direct or confrontational or any of that kind of can of worms. So that was really great to hear about. I'm seeing in the questions, we got a question from Steve, actually kind of related to this. And he wants to talk about the guy who flipped your platform more. Some artists in that situation might give up considering their project and vision ruined. Can you talk a little bit more about your philosophy as an artist that led you to pivot the project in such an interesting way?
Thank you. Thank you for that wonderful question. Yeah. It was interesting. Like my friends and my husband, they were outraged. They were like, and they made all kinds of assumptions, like, oh, it must be a Trump supporter. I mean, I guess Trump wasn't a president yet, or they must be redneck or whatever. And I said, no, 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 no. And I asked myself, well, what is this project for? It's a community art project. So it's not about me. It's not even about my proposal. It's about them. So what do they want? And he's one of them, right? So naturally, I went to talk to him. And, he was not against the project. So he left a little room there, right? So that's kind of where I went. And when I approached him about appearing on the video, he said yes. And that was another door that he opened. So like every step, he left that door open. Like, the fact that he left his contact information on the paper, I read that as a sign that he was inviting me to, contact him. So it's always this kind of conversation, that dialogue that happens. It's not just about me. And that's the beauty of any kind of public or community art project, because something like that always happens, right? So if you just close the door there, then you don't get anywhere. It's only because that kind of reaction happens that your project can grow. So it's part of this. But I have to say, it is difficult psychologically. So it's a process. All right. So,
Okay, great. Awesome. And we have another question from Ari. And she says, wondering whether you could also share the ways in which you've used your art to engage others around basic income. And if so, what has the response been?
Okay. So this is a tough question. I organized a basic income march in Hudson Valley last fall, and it was a big disappointment. I thought I would get a lot of support from artists, and that was the reason I started supporting UBI anyway. But, artists are really not political by nature. And I don't know, it's been hard to rally people, not just artists, but people around UBI. Woodstock is a very progressive area, so people really, they show up for BLM or voting rights or things like that. But for some reason, it's been really hard to get a traction with UBI support. So I'm thinking about a lot of different things now, but it's been a surprise to me. So, like I said, I'm working on the animation right now. I think one way to do this is to tie UBI with a bigger issue, like environmental issues or, inequality, more of a bigger social contract rather than just UBI itself. It seems like it's a little bit too narrow for people, surprisingly, to commit their engagement in. Annie?
I'm back.
Maybe
Awesome.
you can just stay there.
Okay, sounds good. Cool. So I think that's all the questions we have in the Ask a Question section right now, unless there's anybody else who wants to jump in. You can also throw a question in the chat because I'm looking at that right now. So we'll just wait a couple seconds.
So great that this whole chat thing is going on. There's a lot of information there.
Yeah, I love Crowdcast. It makes it really easy to stay engaged the whole time in different ways.
And the recording will include the chats also?
Yep, yeah. And so this is also great for everyone who has attended this session. So Crowdcast is a really great platform. So if once we close down this session immediately after, you can use the same link to access this recording. So if there's people in your life that you want to share this with, artists or anybody else. There's a lot of really great tax information that I was really appreciative of. I'm also an artist, so I didn't know how much you could write off your taxes. So that was awesome to know.
Again,
yeah.
Consult your accountant.
I'll talk to my accountant first. But yeah, so there's really great information in here. And so if you'd like to share this recording or watch it again or do whatever, you can just use the same link. Once the recording is done, it'll just be up there for you to watch, which is great. Yeah, so I think that I don't see any other questions from the audience. It looks like we're coming up to the end of our 45 minutes. So thank you so much, Keiko, for this presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Really wonderful to hear about your experiences and your art. Awesome. Sorry, there's some background noise where I am. But yeah, and so as Keiko mentioned, NABIG is providing some online networking opportunities for you to be able to talk to other attendees, and also Keiko is displaying some of her art in a virtual gallery in Kumo Space. So I'm gonna just drop the link in the chat right there. So if you guys would like to go check that out after this presentation, that'll be up there for you. And if you enjoyed this session, there's a lot more amazing programming this year for NABIG 2021. We have the rest of today and all of tomorrow.
Yes.
So we have quite a few sessions.
Now I can join other sessions, yes.
Yeah. And also Keiko and I were actually talking about this before the session. If you were in this session, there's some concurrent sessions happening at the same time. So if you're in one, you might not be able to see the other one or two that are happening at the same time. But same thing goes for those. The recordings will be available on Crowdcast, so you can access them after the fact. So there's, I'm going to drop the link to this full schedule. So you can access sessions from that link to the schedule. So for instance, there were two big panels yesterday, and those recordings are available if you'd like to go check those out if you weren't able to see them. So yeah, and we have some great keynotes later today as well. One of them is called The Intersectionality of Basic Income at 2:00 Eastern. And the other one is called Pilots, Data, and the Drive Towards Cash Policies at 6 p.m. Eastern. So we hope you guys can join for those. Yeah, I think I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you again, Keiko. That was really wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.